Paul, let me ask you first question out of the box, out of the batter's box, if you will. How did the book come to be? Before we drill down and get into Roy and his career, how did the book come to be?
All right, so that's a long story that I'll try to make very short. I've lived my whole life reaching for the stars and dreaming big and hoping for things and saying, if you don't take chances, things will never happen, right? You miss 100% of the shots you never took. So I've reached out to the Yankees back when I was a brand new teacher in the 1990s saying, let me be on your broadcast team. They never said yes, of course. I reached out to Bob Shepard at one point when he was the Yankee PA announcer and said, hey, someday when you retire, how would I go about replacing you? And he wrote me a nice letter back, which we could talk about sometime. Um, but I've always believed in dreaming big. And so because I dream big, I have my Yankee site start spreading the news. That led to a couple of podcasts on the Northeast Streaming Sports Network. And the man who runs that program, Mac McGrath, was able to arrange an interview with Roy White. And so I was going to do the interview, and that really was going to be it. I was going to interview Roy White on a podcast. And then Roy had to cancel. It was on a Wednesday, and he said the next day I can do it as a Thursday. I was an active principal at the time. I had a school event. I couldn't do it. So I told Mac, I said, listen, I can't be there. You do the interview, but please tell Roy White that I would love to write his autobiography. It has never been written, and it deserves to be told. His story needs to be told. And I'm not like a writer who's looking for him to tell all the secrets about Reggie and Billy and Mickey Mantle and all that. I just want Roy White to tell his story. The next day, I got a text from Mac and it had Roy White's phone number. And I reached out to him and we talked about a month later. And I gave him my elevator pitch. He called me about the next day after we texted a couple times. And he said, let me think about it. And about a day or so later, he texted me back and said, let's give this a shot. And the rest is his history. We started working within a couple of weeks and we spent all year last year writing the book. And he was as gracious a human being, as kind a human being, as gentle and compassionate and understanding and patient as anyone I've ever met. That was always his reputation. They always say Roy White's a classy ball player. He's more than that. He's an absolute fantastic human being.
Roy White bridged those lean years along with Bobby Mercer in my eyes, because I caught just the end of Mickey Mantle when he was in his decline. So the book really resonates with me, and I'm sure you've heard that many times from people that have read the book on your book tours.
Yes, yes. Great players, special players, they touch our lives in different ways. I've had a couple of talks about this with a number of people in recent weeks. The players of our youth, we look up to them and celebrate them different than the players we root for as adults. Right. So, I can appreciate Aaron Judge. I can appreciate Anthony Rizzo. I even could have appreciated, and I did, Derek Jeter, but I never looked up to those guys the way that I did the players when I was a kid. Roy White, Greg Nettles, Thurman Munson, Reggie. Those guys were big. Don Mattingly, probably the last player I had that type of awe for. Ron Guidry. They were bigger than life. And for many people, Roy White is that single person because he is the only guy who bridged that gap between when the Yankees were terrible and they became great again.
Paul, again, two things resonate and really jump out as a theme. One of them is classy. The other one is underrated. Whitey Ford called Roy White, quote, the most underrated and underappreciated Yankee of all time. And then that's end quote. And you go on to say White could hit, get on base, steal a base, score a lot of runs, masterfully patrol left field. He's one of the few players to spend 15 seasons with the Yankees. He played 1,881 games, seventh all-time among Yankees, and he played in 3 World Series, 76, and then on the winning 77 and 78 team. What is it, the man, Roy, what is it that made him underrated?
I think that's a long answer. What made Roy White underrated, I think, to do it in a short answer, is the fact that the skills he brought to the game were not the skills that the people who were the caretakers of the game, the people who wrote about the game, the people who announced the games, the people who were the people that the fans looked to explain the game, didn't look at the game the way that we look at the game today. So Roy White wasn't a 300 hitter. So, you had to be a 300 hitter back then in the eyes of people to be very good or to be great. He wasn't quite a 300 hitter. He didn't hit a whole lot of home runs. So back then, he's not a 25 home run. He's not a 30 home run guy. So he doesn't hit 300. He doesn't hit a lot of home runs. He's just nice. They didn't look at things like sacrifice flies, walks, times on base, fielding. He went an entire season without making an error. I think it was 1971. So a lot of his skills, the fact that he played every single day, we could talk about the Yankees today. There's so many guys on the 2023 Yankees that can't stay healthy, right? That are very good ball players, but I've always said if you're not on the field, you're not contributing anything to the team. Roy White was on the field. He played every day. He scored a lot of runs. He could steal bases. He hit behind runners. He did all of the things that today he would be a sabermetric dream. People would be gushing over him. But back then, a lot of those things went under the radar and they didn't quite realize how great he was.
That's a great point. That's a great answer. In giving you kudos, David Ostrowski from the Atlanta Jewish Times brought up something that I found very interesting, and I thought it was a very good point. Quote, the Red Sox succession of left fielders, we went from Ted Williams and Yaz and Rice and Manny is well known. But the Yankee counterparts, it brings up a good point when you think about it. There was a bit of, a void in left field, and he was prolific left fielder. So that lends itself to some credence to another theme in your book. Roy White belongs in Monument Park.
Without a doubt. Your show's an hour and I could spend the next hour and then the next hour talking about why Roy White belongs in Monument Park. But in short, Monument Park is the place where the Yankees celebrate their great history. And it's not just a place for Hall of Famers. It's a place where they recognize the players who made significant contributions to the team. It can be argued that the greatest left fielder in Yankee history is Roy White, that he played more games out there that no one played. You could say there were better outfielders. He wasn't Babe Ruth or Mickey Mantle or Joe DiMaggio, but there was never a better left fielder, especially somebody who played on the Yankees for 15 years, won multiple championships, won a couple of, was an all-star a number of times. He did everything the right way. He was also, and we could talk about this, I think one of the reasons the Yankees were able to succeed, especially in 77 and 78 during the turmoil with Billy Martin and Reggie and Thurman and George and all that chaos, was because there were players like Roy White who were the calm and steady influence. If there was chaos everywhere, I don't think the Yankees would have been able to get through all of that. Greg Nettles had the famous quote, when I was a kid, one day I wanted to grow up and join the circus or play Major League Baseball. And with the Yankees, I got to do both. The Yankees needed to have those quiet, steady guys, those pieces of consistency, which were the building blocks that kept everything on an even keel so that the chaos didn't distract as much as it could have or might have. And Roy White was that. And he was a better player than a lot of the guys in Monument Park. And here's what it comes down to in the end. If you're not in Monument Park, you become a lost person to the next generation or generations of Yankees fans. They'll know the players who are there because people are going to go out there and they're going to buy jerseys because they see the numbers out in Monument Park. They're going to read the plaques and those guys will be remembered. But if you're not there, those players somehow, unless you're a historian, get forgotten about. Guys like Hank Bauer and Tommy Henrich and Charlie Keller and Roy White. And it would be a shame that the only player to play the entire decade of the 70s with the Yankees, the only guy, doesn't get that recognition. And the other crime, I'm overstating the word crime, but Roy White's not a young man. He's in great shape, but he's going to be 80. And, it's important to recognize these people while they're still alive. There's an awful lot of guys in Yankees history that caused chaos and controversy, and that happens. We're people. But Roy White never did that. And, it's time to also recognize that he represented the Yankees in a classy, dignified way for his whole life since he's been a Yankee, which is dating over 60 years now.
The thing that surprised me, and the thing that was a page turner at the beginning of your book, I never realized, Paul, he overcame polio and overcame poverty to the degree that he did. Could you just explain just briefly for our viewers?
Yeah, absolutely. He had polio as a kid. I think he was in first or second grade. His grandmother was a nurse in a hospital, and he came home and he showed some of the signs, and she recognized it immediately and got him to the hospital, and they, put him on antibiotics. He missed about 6 or 8 weeks of school, as I recall, and actually went back a grade because they couldn't advance him, but he worked real hard and he got caught up. And if his grandma hadn't noticed that, that could have been it right then and there. He would have never been able to recover. The disease would have ravaged him too quickly. So he owes a lot to his grandmother being so quick and so able to diagnose something and get him the help he needed. And then he grew up in Compton. His mom and dad were a interracial couple in the 1940s. So if you think about that, 80 years ahead of their time. And maybe society wasn't ready for that. But for whatever reason, the marriage didn't last. And Roy lived with his mother. She was on public assistance. They couldn't always pay their bills. They lived in Compton, which is, I believe, the part of Los Angeles that's right next to Watts. It was a inner city at a time when things weren't great. And Roy also tells the story about one time they were walking, and I think they were walking into the Watts neighborhood when a car comes slowly by them. And there were a bunch of bad kids in that car, and the car pulled over, and they approached Roy and the couple of kids he was working with, and they had, chains and tire irons or whatever. And those kids, Roy including, just scattered. They ran for their lives because they had all seen other kids in situations like that get beat up and real bad. And Roy tells the story that when he ran away from these guys, he took a quick turn onto his Little League field, and he thought they had followed him as he ran onto the Little League field, and it must have rained previously or the grass was damp, and he stepped on the grass in the outfield and he slipped and fell, and he laid there in the dark because it was nighttime, thinking that he was about to get pummeled, and he never did. And the only thing that saved him was they didn't chase him through the baseball field. Maybe they didn't see him, or maybe they went after somebody else or whatever. But he said he thought about that later on, standing in left field at Yankee Stadium saying, oh my goodness, 10, 15 years earlier, whatever it was, I almost died in left field on my Little League field. So yeah, it was a tough time for him. He said he had one pair of shoes growing up. And when they played baseball, they played a game called sock ball because they didn't have baseballs. They just found socks or, some type of fabric and tied it up, and that became the ball they used.
A lot of people don't know this, but he says it was my bat that Bucky Dent used to hit his famous home run in Boston in 1978. That's amazing in and of itself.
Yeah, it's when you get a chance to talk to somebody like Roy White, the stories they just come. People have asked, how hard was it to write this book? And listen, writing a book is never easy. It takes countless hours. It's a lot of hard work. But that being said, this wasn't hard to write. We met once or twice a week or once or twice a month for 7 or 8 months, and we talked about this. I just sat and he would tell us stories and I'd type, and then I'd go home and I'd polish. And because he is such a great storyteller, because he has such a great memory, because he had such great stories to tell, the book basically, and I don't want to discount the writing process, but the book basically wrote itself. And so, yeah, that's one of those great stories that everybody knows. Bucky got a different bat. Mickey Rivers handed him a bat before he hit that home run, but the bat he handed him was a Roy White model.
That's amazing. And Paul, what I was leading up to there was with all the accolades and all of the um, exciting high points in his career. Share with the viewers, what did he say his most exciting Yankee or baseball memory was?
Well, he says two different things, because I was just at an event and he in the book, I basically have him saying, because that's what he's told me, that his greatest moment was just walking into the Yankees locker room
Right.
and being there and being accepted as part of the team. The Yankees, I don't think, I was just talking about how we look up to players and stuff. I'm not sure we look up to, even as adults, look at the players the same way today as they did back then. I mean, Mickey Mantle, even to adults, I believe, was larger than life. And Roy White grew up watching Mickey Mantle in the World Series on the games of the week. They didn't get every game on TV or whatever. And all of a sudden, he's in the same locker room with him and Whitey Ford and Elston Howard and Roger Maris. And you know what? If I got a chance to walk in the locker room and they all said hi to me, that's one thing. That's nice. Hey, yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you. But they weren't just being nice to him, they were welcoming him as an equal. I mean, what a feeling that must be to walk into the locker room with these legends, these Greek god types of human beings, and they're like, "Yeah, man, you're one of us." So that was one big memory. When he talks about his greatest memory from the on the field, again, speaking to the fact that he's not a person who looks at himself, it's when Chris Chambliss hit that home run in the 1976 playoffs against the Royals that put the Yankees in the World Series.
Wow. I remember it well, and and just as you said, when you're a kid, it just makes it that much more impactful. You mentioned Mickey Mantle. With this show that I do, which is in its 15th season, I've been fortunate to interview many different people, and I was fortunate and to become friends with Mickey Mantle's son, Danny Mantle. And when I
That's
told
great.
him I was doing this interview, he said, make sure you tell Paul to tell Roy that Roy was my favorite Yankee teammate of my dad. And that was unsolicited. I said, do you really feel? He goes, yes. He goes, really feel that way. And my dad loved Roy. 1965, his first year, the Yankees have their first, I believe you wrote in the book, their first losing season since 1925. Was that difficult for him, or was it a bit of something favorable where he was able to get his feet under him as a pro without all of that pressure of winning?
Oh, I think he would have preferred the pressure of winning. When he signed his contract, and this story's all in the book, he actually got signed after all the other kids in his neighborhood, and there were a lot of kids who grew up in the Compton area who end up playing professional sports, and a couple guys in the NFL. Reggie Smith is one of the most notable players because they end up playing against each other on the Red Sox and Yankees, and then Reggie Smith's on the Dodgers when they play each other in the World Series. Um, but so he signs after the minor league season begins, and I think it was 1962. So he ends up playing that whole summer, American Legion ball and things like that, as a Yankee property, basically, because it was too late to go to spring training and all that was over. And so he plays that whole summer. He doesn't report till the next year, and he wasn't offered a whole lot of money to sign. And when he asked for advice from like his old coaches and things like that, they said, listen, you're going to be on the Yankees. They're always in the World Series. So I think the sense was I might be getting less money, but I'm going to be on the Yankees, and down the road, it's going to pay off. And so I don't think he was happy at all. I don't think anybody was, that the Yankees weren't great. But 1965 was his first year. He didn't play a whole lot that year. He came up and had his first taste of the big league. So I think at that point, you're just happy to be there. And I'll bet you the Yankees themselves, after being in the World Series the previous 5 seasons, that sometimes happens. The Yankees in 1925 didn't make the World Series, in 1924, but they'd made it in 21, 22, and 23, and then 26, 27, and 28. Sometimes you just have a bad year in there. I don't know if everybody realized in 1965 that the bottom was going to fall out and they'd be in last place the next year.
Paul, you mentioned something where you said that in the book you wrote that is his greatest thrill was walking into the locker room, etc. But then when he was speaking, publicly, he mentioned that the Chris Chambliss home run in '76 was great. I'm almost curious as to why that one, and I'll tell you where I'm going with this. As much as I love that memory of that home run, and it was great, part of it that tempers my love for that is what comes after that. Because in 1976, that put us into the World Series, ladies and gentlemen. But what I recall after that was getting swept by the Big Red Machine, by the Cincinnati Reds. And I was at I guess it was game 3. It was the coldest I ever was. And at a baseball game, maybe not at a football game, but I wasn't expecting that. So that's the thing that, with that memory of Chambliss, it's a little bittersweet because it didn't culminate. Now, I'm just going to fast forward a little bit to your chapter 9, World Series champions, 1977. And let me just mention that my greatest sports memory was the night that Reggie hit the 3 home runs to clinch the World Series. And I was fortunate enough to be an 18-year-old kid at the game. And when the game was over, I ran onto the field, Paul, and I'm running around just like you see it on video, and I'm trying to grab something, maybe first base, second base, too late for all of that. My friend and I, we run out to the pitcher's mound. Maybe we'll get the pitching rubber, but you can't pry that up with your hands. A Yankee fan came prepared. He pulls out a tire iron and he pulls out a crowbar. And so I said to my friends, "What were we thinking? How come we didn't bring a crowbar?"
That's
we were
great.
laughing. I had to get something, Paul. So everybody was ripping up sod, from the infield. So it just rolled right up. I picked rolled up a section of Yankee Stadium grass, rolled it up into a ball, and I put it in my snow parker. Go home that night, and my mom is like, "What?" She goes, "I was getting worried about you. Where I was watching the news, everything looked so chaotic." I said, "It was." I said, "It really was." And she goes, "What's that?" And I said, "Yankee Stadium grass, and we're going to plant it in the backyard. Memory for a lifetime." One thing that made me a little sad was that you wrote very eloquently that he felt that he wasn't as much a part of that team as he felt he should have been or could have been. And it made me sad to hear that he didn't go to the parade for that reason. Could you elaborate on that?
Let me just take one step back and say Roy White never says anything bad about anybody else. So if anybody's going to try to read between the lines, Roy White didn't say anything bad here, but he was not happy with Billy Martin in the 1977 World Series. In '76, the Yankees were they were humiliated. They got swept by the Cincinnati Reds. They weren't happy about that. The interesting thing for Roy White was the Reds were his favorite team as a kid growing up. He liked the National League. He loved their uniforms. And so it's kind of fun for him that they were playing the Reds in the World Series. And he feels like if the Yankees had had another day or two to prepare, that it was a whirlwind from that big game with Chambliss's home run. And then they flew out to Cincinnati like the next day. They had like one day to practice and it was freezing cold, as you mentioned, that maybe they could have done better. But in '77, they're now playing the Dodgers and they're playing against the team that's from his hometown, Compton, Los Angeles. And Billy Martin had said, "Roy, I'm going to platoon you and Lou Piniella. You'll both get a lot of playing time." And this was Roy White's big chance to play at home in front of his family and his friends and his community. And he never played. He barely had a chance to participate in that World Series. And he felt like that he wasn't being treated honestly or fairly. And yeah, unfortunately, we're all human. And sometimes we feel discouraged or resentment. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he didn't feel as much a part of that team that won it all. And so there was some emptiness and he didn't go to the parade. He didn't go to the next year either after the Yankees won, and he was a big part of that team, but he didn't
That's
want to be a hypocrite.
that was my follow-up question, because that's your next chapter, chapter 10, and that's the 78 World Series. And that's where I was going with that, because there he was, and Bob Lemon was the manager, and he was a big part of it. Yet I think you mentioned in the book that he says it was a regret on his part not to.
Absolutely. You know, we make decisions at the time that we believe are the right decisions. And they probably are, because we're making them. I'm not a believer in would've, shoulda, coulda, because we make the best decisions we can at the time. And Roy White, I think today, realizes that, these were once in lifetime opportunities to get a chance to, go down the Canyon of Heroes in a big parade and be celebrated as a world champion Yankee. So he never had those opportunities because he passed them by because of the fact that what had happened in 77. But I think he does regret that today.
When you think about it, that was really towards the end of Roy's relationship and career with the Yankees. But now there becomes another exciting chapter in his life. Share with our viewers what happened after his Yankee career, because there's a tie-in. We talked about Mickey Mantle, and then amazingly, he picks up his career, and fill in the blanks if you can.
And he picks up his career in Japan. Uh, He does not re-sign with the Yankees after the 1979 season, and an offer comes from the Yomiuri Giants of Tokyo, and they really liked Roy White, and they wanted him to be a part of their club, and they offer him more money than any Major League Baseball team had ever offered Roy White to play. And he'd always been fascinated by the idea of playing overseas. His sister years before had been a part of a dance troupe that had gone to Japan and spoke really glowingly of the country. And in the back of his mind, he always thought, like, wouldn't it be neat to play in Japan? And so he got this opportunity, and he went to the Tokyo Giants. And as you mentioned, he batted fourth to protect Mickey Mantle in the lineup. And when he got to Japan, he batted fourth to protect the great Sadahara O in the lineup. And Sadahara O is the all-time home run king in any league. He hit over 800 home runs. And Roy White was the guy in the lineup to protect him. And Roy White won a World Series, but they call it the Japan Series, but he won a World Series in Japan. And he's one of the very few guys to ever do that, to win a World Series with the Yankees and then win a World Series with the Tokyo Giants, the great team in Japan. So he's won a championship with both greatest teams in both countries.
When you talk about his statistics on page 239 of your book, you just give a little bit of an overview of some of his statistics and where they rank. I mean, when you think about times on base, he ranked eighth. He ranks eighth all time. What could be more impactful than times on base? He's in the top 10 with at bats, top 10 in walks, second in sacrifice flies, top 10 in games played. Okay, and then in hits, ranked 11th. I mean, some of these numbers are staggering. Position players: WAR 11th, runs scored 13th, stolen bases 6th. Amazing.
A top Yankee, right?
Right.
So how can you look at those numbers? If you're the New York Yankee franchise, how can you look at those numbers and say, this is a player who does not deserve to be recognized in Monument Park, that doesn't deserve a day, a moment, a throw out a first pitch to recognize a guy who was one of the great players? You can't deny that a guy who's 11th out of all the hundreds of players, thousands probably, who played for the New York Yankees over their long history, the guy who's 11th in WAR. And if I don't have the list of the Yankees WAR stats, I mean, I could pull it up on my computer if I wanted to quickly, but a lot of those guys that are higher were guys who came after him. It's like Jeter's higher. So I believe Bernie Williams is higher.
But these are all-time greats, and
right. But when Roy White retired, correct.
First ballot Hall of Famers.
Correct. But when Roy White retired, he was a top 10 guy in that category.
Right. Obviously, Mantle would be ahead.
Yeah, Mantle's there.
But he's again first ballot Hall of Famer. A lot of this journey with regard to Roy, we go from the decline, and it's maybe too strong to say the decay of the Yankees, but really, in a way, yeah, the city was in decay, and the stadium itself was falling down. And when George Steinbrenner bought the team, again, the things from my childhood, the things that I was proud of as a Yankee fan was Roy White, Bobby Mercer, but it was lean. And then when Steinbrenner buys the team, it starts becoming revitalized. But he was a bridge, Paul, to a very large degree from the halcyon days of Mickey Mantle to to the Bronx Zoo, when with the championships in '77 and '78. He was certainly a bridge.
Yeah, absolutely. And he played in the old Yankee Stadium, got a chance to play in the new Yankee Stadium, and had to put up with those couple of years at Shea, which he didn't enjoy. I don't think many people did. And Bobby Mercer especially did not like playing at Shea Stadium.
That's right. That's right. Bobby Mercer almost had a nervous breakdown over it, right? He was what I would call top hand dominant. He was like a dead puller. He had that short porch down pat. Bobby Mercer did. I mean, I shouldn't say that he was a 300 hitter, but the thing is that he really knew how to hook the ball down the right field line. And at Shea Stadium, he was like, and then he goes from there to Candlestick, which was
Right.
was bad to
Bad to
worse. But
worse. Yeah.
there's so many points to be made with just as you said so accurately, that he belongs in Monument Park, and then all of the others that echo that opinion. What was your takeaway from the book when you completed it with Roy? Were you both satisfied? How would you sum up the experience?
I sum up the experience as unreal. Like, as I said in the beginning, the idea that I would ever have a chance to write Roy White's autobiography and meet him a couple of times a month over the course of a year, and get texts from him and phone calls from him like, "Oh, look, Roy White's calling me." There's the idea that that ever happened is at times beyond comprehension. So that's where the word unreal comes. So it was a dream come true. It was something that I'm honored and very proud that I had an opportunity to do. When I talked to Roy White about the book in the very beginning, the thing I told him was, "This is going to be your story. It's going to be your book. I will write it. I will write it with you, but there's not going to be a word in the book. There's not going to be a comma or a period." He didn't care about that part of it, but the bigger point holds, that you don't approve of. Everything that's in there, you're going to agree to before it gets published. And so I would send him the chapters ahead of time. He had the entire manuscript. He read through it. I encouraged him to share it with his kids and his wife and his best friends and everybody he knows, to make sure that they were happy and that he was happy with the words that we had there. And he was. There was very few things in the entire process that he ever changed. The only thing that I could really say that he changed was in the back. There's a section that's called "What Made Roy White Successful" by me, by Paul Semendinger. I originally wrote that. I just felt I wanted one last piece of the book. And I originally wrote "What Made Me Successful" by Roy White. And it's all basically the same words, except it was in the first person. And when I first wrote it and sent it to him, he said, "I like it." And then he talked to me the next time we saw each other, and he said, "Mm, that's not me. I don't talk about myself like that." We talked about that, like he's self-effacing. "I didn't catch that fly ball. Were you really good at basketball?" It was pretty good, but G. Michael was really good. Um, and so I said, "Oh, all right, I could take it out, because if you're not happy with it, we'll take it out." But then I said, "But I kind of like it because it really sums up everything. Would you mind if I wrote that, since I wrote it anyway, and just changed the wording of it and said, instead of 'what made me successful,' it comes from me, 'what made Roy White successful?'" And he said, "Yeah, if you write it, that's fine." Except I wouldn't talk about myself in that manner, and he doesn't. So, that's what I got out of it. Was I had this opportunity to work with one of the idols, one of the people I looked up to in my life as a child, one of the great Yankees of all time. I had a chance to see, and I still get a chance to see what it's like when people get a chance to meet him and they tell him stories about how much they look up to him. And so it's continually living a special dream, and it's something that'll always hold in my heart closely forever because it's special.